In one corner, you got Mark Carney, calm, collected, data-driven, quietly plotting Canada's long-term resilience. In the other, there's Donald Trump, impulsive, ego-driven, slapdash.
If you're done watching corrupt elites rig the system and leave you behind, subscribe now. If you want real talk, raw truth, and zero spin, this is your channel. If you're ready to fight back, hit that subscribe button and stand with us.
Swinging tariffs like a bulldozer and calling it winning. This isn't policy analysis. It's a case study in leadership by contrast. One building supply chains, healthcare safety nets, and strategic regulation. The other tearing at them for a fleeting photo op. Understanding just how profound this clash is starts with America's car factories. Carney recognized early that U.S. steel tariffs would backfire, with ripple effects throughout North America. He showed the math. Canadian suppliers are integrated into American OEMs. Cut us out, cost you more. What Trump dismissed as rock-solid protectionism ended up strangling U.S. automakers. Factory downtime, layoffs, recalls, they mounted daily. And the ironic punchline? Carney's data-driven warnings backed up every crisis. Trump's trade stunt became a self-inflicted wound. Instead of slapping tariffs, Carney championed a national economic pivot. He promoted Canadian-made supply chains, incentivized manufacturers to keep it local, and leaned on strategic regulation, not chaos, to bolster domestic resilience. The result? Factories expanding, investments flowing in, and job stability without the drama. No tweets, no tantrums, just quiet progress underpinned by policy, not populism. While Carney fortified Canada, Trump relentlessly cut domestic safety nets. His deep Medicaid cuts were a wrecking ball to rural America. Hospitals shut down, clinics closed, preventable diseases surged. Parents had to choose between groceries or doctor visits. That wasn't budget discipline. It was moral bankruptcy disguised as fiscal conservatism. Those vulnerable Americans, they weren't optimistic. They were terrified. That's what happens when government retreats under an America First slogan. Americans suffer first. Trump's tariffs weren't designed to help middle America. They were smoke and mirrors. The real victims weren't policy targets. They were everyday consumers. Construction supplies, autos, appliances, groceries. Prices went up across the board. Trump called it trade revenues. Canadians called it what it was, a tax on consumption. Carney's regime avoided this trap by combining targeted tariffs with regulatory confidence, preserving affordability while protecting Canadian workers. That's policy, not pandering. Carney's masterstroke? Turning Trump's aggression into Canada's negotiating advantage. He paused, not canceled, the digital services tax and charted the trade lines to pressure Trump's unrealistic demands. Meanwhile, America stumbled, facing backlash from manufacturers, farmers, and healthcare providers. Carney weaponized data, leverage, and calm. Trump wielded tweets, tantrums, and red hats. You already know who's standing. The divergence couldn't be more stark. Under Carney, who heavily influenced Canada's economic strategies, healthcare remained a right, not a political football. Regulation ensured quality, stability, and access. Under Trump, healthcare became a wedge issue. Medicaid cuts, pre-existing condition threats, and rising premiums, all sacrificed for donor tax breaks and political theater. Homes across rural America became collateral damage. This is beneath the surface. The U.S. under Trump stumbled into uncertainty. Investment slowed. Business strategy halted due to trade unpredictability. Markets soared on headlines, not fundamentals, and then corrected harshly. Meanwhile, in Canada, resilient economic indicators and low inflation rates held steady. GDP grew steadily, not spectacularly, simply because Carney's policies insulated Canadians from seismic policy shocks. American heartland towns were once Trump's base. He promised blue-collar salvation. Instead, they got healthcare deserts, food insecurity, and economic decline. Under Carney's watch, Canada invested in rural broadband, healthcare funding, and agricultural grants, building resilient communities without rally cry rhetoric. Canada wasn't desperate. America was, and its people were paying the price. Policy isn't just numbers. It's moral accounting. Carney prioritized public health and long-term economic stewardship. Trump prioritized fringe donor interests and short-term optics. The ledger isn't even close. You don't build national pride by destroying healthcare or inflating grocery bills. Canada responded with legitimacy. Polls showed overwhelming support. Political capital soared. Global investors saw Canada as stable and fair. Meanwhile, American public sentiment wavered. Anger over rising prices, fear over lost health care, confusion over unstable trade policy. Trump rallied his base, but only to keep them focused on his rhetoric, not their hardship. There are leaders and there are actors. Carney built. Trump broke. Carney protected auto jobs, rural health care, and sustainable growth. Trump dismantled supply chains, endangered clinics, and fueled inflation. Canada emerges stronger and more self-sufficient. America, bruised, divided, and far from first. This transcript wasn't just an argument. It's a forecast. Trump's America is the first casualty of reckless leadership. Carney's Canada? It's now the blueprint for sustainable, humane governance in a fracturing world. Economic sovereignty versus economic sabotage. While Mark Carney was laying the groundwork for an economy built on domestic resilience and fair taxation, Donald Trump was throwing America into a tailspin of economic self-sabotage. Under Carney, Canada doubled down on a vision of economic sovereignty, protecting domestic industry from foreign manipulation, encouraging onshore production, and leveraging regulatory frameworks to ensure Canadian interests remain front and center. Canada wasn't just reacting to U.S. aggression. It was leading by example. Trump, meanwhile, was launching trade wars he didn't understand, with consequences he refused to own. His obsession with tariffs as a cure-all led to widespread disruption in global supply chains and inflicted economic pain on the very Americans he claimed to protect. The North American auto industry, once a shining symbol of cross-border cooperation, became collateral damage in a war of ego. Canadian steel, American losses. Take the example of Trump's 25% steel tariffs and the retaliatory 50% tariffs Carney imposed on key U.S. metals. Trump believed he was punishing Canada for daring to assert itself, but he ended up punishing American manufacturers and consumers. Prices soared. Contracts collapsed. Production slowed. U.S. automakers were forced to source parts from other markets, while Canadian suppliers, backed by Carney's strategic stimulus and subsidies, found new buyers in Europe and Asia. In this zero-sum game, Trump lost, and badly, the great Medicaid meltdown. And while Trump was gutting America's healthcare safety nets, cutting Medicaid by billions and leaving rural communities to fend for themselves, Carney was reinforcing the importance of public investment. In Carney's Canada, healthcare wasn't just a policy, it was a pillar of economic security. Investment in hospitals, mental health, and community clinics was viewed as infrastructure, as essential as roads and bridges. Contrast that with Trump's America. Bankrupt rural hospitals, uninsured families, and elderly citizens forced to choose between insulin and groceries. The social unraveling caused by Trump's Medicaid slash-and-burn campaign didn't just damage lives, it crippled entire local economies. Food wars and agricultural fallout. Trump's escalating tariffs on Canadian agricultural goods were meant to intimidate, but Carney turned that pressure into fertilizer for Canadian growth, literally. With direct subsidies to grain and dairy farmers and accelerated investment in agricultural R&D. Canada not only stabilized its food supply chain, but also began exporting at levels that embarrassed a faltering U.S. market. Trump's America, meanwhile, saw a 22% rise in farm bankruptcies in just 2 years. Family farms were wiped out. Debt soared. Suicide rates in rural communities hit crisis levels. And as Trump laughed it off at rallies, Carney met with Canadian farmers, listened to their needs, and made policy with them, not over them. Strategic retreats versus reckless escalation. One of the most telling moments of the Carney-Trump saga was Canada's temporary pause on the digital services tax. Critics called it a retreat, but insiders knew it was a chess move, a sacrifice of the pawn to check the king. Carney removed Trump's legal pretext for launching a devastating Section 301 investigation, and in doing so, flipped the power dynamic. Trump's retaliation plan was disarmed before it began. Canada, having controlled the narrative and outmaneuvered its rival, kept every bit of its negotiating leverage while exposing the hollowness of Trump's bluster. It was trade diplomacy jiu-jitsu, and Trump never saw it coming. Tech titans and tax justice. Carney's original digital services tax wasn't just an economic policy. It was a statement of values. For too long, U.S. tech giants have been making billions off Canadian users while paying pennies in taxes. Carney's 3% levy was a global bellwether, a signal that the era of digital impunity was over. Trump, backed by Amazon, Google, and Meta donors, raged against it. His tantrums had little to do with trade law and everything to do with political survival. But Carney's plan had already shifted the global conversation. The EU praised it. France adopted a similar model. The OECD moved closer to a unified digital tax framework. Even when Carney paused implementation, the principle was embedded in global consciousness. If you profit from a country's people, you must contribute to their society. Trump, by contrast, bowed to big tech while pretending to fight for the little guy. Alaska, a hostage of geography. Perhaps the most dramatic leverage Canada wielded came in the form of geography. With Alaska's only land route to the continental U.S. running through Canadian territory, the Trudeau government had long avoided politicizing the arrangement. But under Carney, things changed. When Trump escalated tariffs, Carney approved a policy review that proposed tolls on the Alcan Highway, a move that would devastate Alaska's fragile economy. The mere mention of tolls sent shockwaves through Juneau and Washington. Suddenly, Alaska's food prices, fuel deliveries, and emergency response infrastructure were at risk. Trump panicked. Carney didn't blink. Energy independence or energy warfare. When Canada canceled a major hydro export contract to the U.S., critics said it would harm Manitoba Hydro's finances. What they missed was a long game. Carney knew energy security would be the battleground of the next decade. Redirecting power to support Canadian electrification, heat pumps, and green industries wasn't just patriotic, it was smart. Trump's energy policies, by contrast, clung to fossil fuels, oil bailouts, and deregulation. While Canada invested in smart grids and decarbonization, the U.S. doubled down on coal plants and frack gas. Even as Europe and Asia courted Canada for clean energy deals, Trump pushed America further into environmental and economic obsolescence. Currency confidence and debt delirium. Under Carney, Canada maintained fiscal discipline even amid global instability. The Canadian dollar held steady. Inflation remained manageable. Public trust in the Bank of Canada remained intact. Meanwhile, Trump's America saw explosive debt increases, trillion-dollar deficits, and a collapsing bond market. Credit rating agencies issued warnings. Foreign investors balked. The U.S. dollar, once untouchable, showed cracks. As Trump printed money to fund tax cuts and trade war bailouts, Carney ensured Canada kept its fiscal house in order. 2 countries, 2 futures. The video doesn't just tell the story of 2 men. It tells the story of 2 futures. One where a country is led by competence, compassion, and strategy, and one where ego, chaos, and performative rage hold the reins. Mark Carney's Canada isn't perfect, but it is principled, steady, and forward-thinking. Trump's America, on the other hand, spirals deeper into dysfunction and delusion with each tariff, each cut, each lie. In the end, the verdict is clear. When leadership is reduced to theater, the people suffer. But when leadership is rooted in strategy and service, the nation thrives. And no amount of Twitter tantrums or empty bravado can reverse that truth. Manufacturing might versus economic mayhem. Carney didn't just talk about manufacturing resilience. He invested in it. Under his economic stewardship, Canada implemented robust reshoring policies to bring production back home, with direct incentives for Canadian companies to build and hire locally. He launched public-private partnerships for green tech manufacturing, battery production, and aerospace development. All sectors abandoned by Trump's America First fraud that mostly outsourced contracts to political allies and cronies. Meanwhile, Trump's administration touted manufacturing while quietly dismantling labor protections and letting key industries rot. Entire swaths of the Rust Belt, which voted for him on the promise of revival, saw more closures and more job losses. Under Carney, Windsor boomed. Under Trump, Youngstown decayed. Supply chain strategy versus logistic lunacy. Carney understood the 21st century battlefield. Supply chains. After the COVID-19 pandemic exposed global vulnerabilities, he built a Canadian strategy rooted in redundancy and regional self-sufficiency. He worked with allies like Germany and Japan to diversify procurement and tech supply routes, ensuring Canada wasn't beholden to any single power, including the United States. Trump, however, burned bridges with allies and turned supply chain reform into a chaotic blame game. His trade feuds with Europe, China, and even Mexico left American firms in limbo, unable to plan, invest, or grow. While Carney built bridges and warehouses, Trump built tariffs and tantrums. Digital sovereignty versus surveillance capitalism. In the age of data, Carney treated digital infrastructure as a matter of national security. He launched initiatives to support Canadian alternatives to U.S.-based platforms, protected data sovereignty through stringent privacy laws, and pushed for transparency from tech companies. His administration also supported the development of Canadian AI and cybersecurity startups to counter foreign influence. Trump, meanwhile, cozied up to Silicon Valley billionaires even as they harvested American user data, spread disinformation, and sold off privacy for profit. While Carney pushed for responsible innovation, Trump surrendered national interests to the algorithms of greed. Climate resilience versus climate denial. On the climate front, Carney wasn't just reactive, he was revolutionary. His economic plan tied every infrastructure investment to emissions reductions, climate mitigation, and long-term sustainability. He introduced carbon border adjustments to protect Canadian green industries from dirty competitors. He didn't just aim for net zero. He demanded economic justice through decarbonization. Trump? He exited the Paris Agreement, called climate change a hoax, and gutted environmental regulations. He approved pipelines through sacred land, subsidized fossil fuel companies, and silenced climate scientists. Carney looked forward. Trump rolled coal. Health equity versus health exploitation. Carney's belief in health care as a right translated into funding models that prioritize mental health, indigenous health equity, and rural clinic expansion. He introduced dental care coverage for low-income children and bolstered telehealth for remote regions, making sure no Canadian was left behind in care access. Trump gutted the Affordable Care Act, attacked Medicaid, and allowed pharmaceutical giants to set prices without oversight. In his America, millions lost coverage during a pandemic. In Carney's Canada, millions gained it. Public trust versus institutional erosion. Perhaps most critically, Carney upheld trust. Trust in institutions, in government, and in the rule of law. He respected journalists, empowered scientists, and let civil servants do their jobs. He didn't govern through spectacle. He governed through service. Trump did the opposite. He labeled the press the enemy, pressured public health officials to lie, and undermined democratic norms at every turn. While Carney built legitimacy, Trump shattered it. While Carney elevated public discourse, Trump dragged it into the sewer. Final thought. Two models for the world. The video transcript makes clear that what we're witnessing isn't just a bilateral spat. It's the clash of two ideologies. Carney's Canada represents a model of resilience, reason, and reform. A country that adapts, thinks long-term, and values the collective good. Trump's America is a cautionary tale of regression, arrogance, and abandonment. A country held hostage by narcissism and greed. And as the world watches, it's becoming clear which model the future belongs to. In the end, Mark Carney didn't just defend Canada, he defined it. A nation that values strategy over spectacle, service over self-interest, and unity over division. His leadership wasn't loud, but it was lasting. Meanwhile, Trump's legacy is a graveyard of broken promises, burnt bridges, and a public left paying the price for his vanity. The contrast is now etched in the fabric of both nations. One rising with quiet strength, the other unraveling under the weight of its own chaos. History won't just remember the policies. It will remember who protected their people and who played them. Carney proved that leadership isn't about grabbing headlines. It's about protecting livelihoods. While Trump basked in the glare of the cameras, obsessed with applause lines and Twitter likes, Carney stayed focused on outcomes. Jobs saved, industry shielded, future secured. He reminded Canadians that diplomacy isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That compromise isn't capitulation, it's control. And that the true measure of power is not how loudly you shout, but how deeply you protect. As Trump's America spirals from one self-inflicted crisis to another, Canada has emerged as a blueprint for resilience. And as the dust settles, one truth becomes unshakable. Strength is silent, but always speaks loudest in the end.